Her fingers dug into my wrist so hard, I felt my pulse jump before I felt the pain. And in that one frozen second, with my daughter's ornament still swinging on the tree behind us and 12 pairs of eyes suddenly on me, I understood that this had never been about Christmas at all. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Emily Parker, and for almost 10 years, I told myself that peace was something you built by staying quiet. I was wrong. But it took a mountain lodge in Asheville, a 5-year-old's paper snowflake ornament, and my mother-in-law's hand closing around my wrist for me to finally understand how wrong I was. I need to back up, because none of it makes sense unless you understand who Evelyn Parker is. She is 67 years old, silver-haired, soft-spoken in public, and one of the most quietly controlling people I have ever known. She doesn't yell. She doesn't need to. Evelyn's weapons are smaller than that. A raised eyebrow at Thanksgiving, a comment about how some people don't know how to discipline a child, or stories retold just slightly wrong until the wrong version becomes the truth everyone remembers. For nearly a decade, I had absorbed those comments like a sponge because my husband, Nathan, taught me, without ever meaning to, that this was simply the cost of being part of his family. Nathan is a good man. I want to say that clearly because this isn't a story about a villain husband. He loves me. He loves our daughter, Harper, fiercely. But Nathan has one weakness, and it is the kind of weakness that doesn't look dangerous until you've lived inside it for years. When his mother gets angry, he goes silent. He doesn't defend me. He doesn't correct her. He just waits for the storm to pass, tells himself he's protecting our marriage, and moves on. What he never realized, what I never fully let myself see, was that his silence wasn't protecting anything. It was quietly making me the villain in every story his mother told. That Christmas Eve, we drove up to the Parker family lodge outside Asheville the way we always did. Snow was falling soft and slow outside the big windows. The tree stood in the corner, already crowded with ornaments that had been in the family for decades. Delicate glass bulbs, hand-painted figures Evelyn had collected on trips to Europe. Harper, our daughter, had made something at school that week. A small paper snowflake, glitter glue smudged at the edges, her name written in crooked 5-year-old letters on the back. She had been so proud of it. She carried it in a paper bag the whole drive up, checking on it every 20 minutes like it might disappear. She hung it on the tree herself, right at her eye level, beaming. I didn't see Evelyn take it down. I only noticed a few minutes later that it was gone, and in its place hung one of her crystal ornaments. I found Harper's snowflake sitting on the side table, and something in me, something that had been building for years without my even noticing, made me walk over and hang it back up. Evelyn watched me do it. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "You always have to make everything about your daughter, don't you?" "She made it herself, Evelyn," I said. "It means something to her." "Everything means something to her because you never teach her that some things aren't about her." I felt my face go hot. I could have let it go. I had let 100 comments like that go before, but something in me had reached its limit. Quietly, without my permission, and I said, "Don't take her ornament down again." What happened next took maybe 4 seconds. Evelyn's face changed, the pleasant mask dropping into something harder, and she said I had never respected this family, never respected her, and that I had turned her son into someone who couldn't even stand up for his own mother anymore. I said something back, I don't fully remember what, and then her hand shot out and closed around my wrist, and she pulled hard, and I stumbled back into a chair. The room went silent in that particular way a room goes silent when everyone has just watched something they can't unsee. Harper started crying. Richard, Nathan's father, half rose from his seat and then sat back down, the way he always did, and Evelyn, looking at Nathan now, said the thing that would end up changing everything. This is what happens when you let a woman like this into a family like ours. I watched something shift in my husband's face. I had seen him absorb comments about me for years without a flicker. This one landed differently. He walked over, picked up Harper, took my hand, not Evelyn's, mine, and said, "We're leaving." He didn't ask me to apologize. In 9 years of marriage, that had never once happened. We drove home in near silence, Harper asleep in her car seat, snow streaking sideways across the windshield. It was past midnight when Nathan finally spoke, staring straight ahead at the road. "There's something I never told you about the property sale, about a trust my dad set up." I turned to look at him. "What trust?" He told me that his father had sold a piece of family land months earlier and put part of the money into a trust meant to be split evenly between Nathan and his sister Lauren. He told me that his mother had been telling Lauren a very different story, that somehow I had convinced Richard to favor Nathan, to cut Lauren out. I sat there in the dark car feeling something cold settle into my chest, because I had never once spoken to Richard about money. I hadn't even known the trust existed. "Why would she say that?" I asked. Nathan didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "Because it's easier to blame you than to admit I made choices she didn't like." That sentence cracked something open in me, because suddenly I was remembering years of small moments differently. The job Nathan had turned down, somehow, in the family retelling, that had been my doing. The Thanksgiving we'd spent at my parents' house instead of the lodge, my doing. The daycare we'd chosen for Harper, the house we'd bought instead of the one closer to Evelyn. All of it, somehow, my doing. I had spent years wondering why I could never seem to do anything right in that family, never understanding that I wasn't actually failing at anything. I was simply the explanation Evelyn had built for decisions that weren't hers to control. I didn't confront anyone right away. I'm not a person who explodes. I'm the person who opens a spreadsheet. So instead, quietly, over the following weeks, I started looking. Old emails, old text threads, invitations I'd supposedly declined that I had never actually seen. And I found something that took my breath away. Messages where Evelyn had told different relatives completely different versions of the same events. To Richard's sister, I never wanted to visit. To Lauren, I had pushed Nathan to keep money in the family. To an old family friend, I had always been difficult. None of it was true. All of it had been carefully, quietly planted, one small story at a time, for years. Lauren found her own version of the truth around the same time, in her own way. She was going through a hard divorce that winter, drowning in legal bills, and she'd been counting on the property money to help her through it. Money she believed had somehow been diverted toward Nathan because of me. When she finally went looking through old messages from her mother, she found the same pattern I had found. Promises that didn't match what Richard had actually put in writing. Stories that shifted depending on who she was talking to. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice tight. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Did you ever tell my dad not to help me?" "No," I said. "I never asked your father for anything in my life." There was a long silence on the line. "I think my mother's been lying to me," she said finally, and I could hear something breaking in her voice. Not anger at me, something worse. The particular grief of realizing your own mother has been using you. Nathan confronted Evelyn alone in the kitchen of the lodge a few days later. He told me about it that night, sitting on the edge of our bed. He said his mother had looked at him and said, "Your wife is turning you against your family." The same line she'd used 100 times before, the line that had always worked. But this time, Nathan said, "No, Mom, I'm finally seeing what you've been doing." Evelyn tried everything after that. Anger, tears, the old accusation that no one appreciated her, and finally the threats she'd clearly used before, quietly, in private. "If you choose her, don't expect me to be your mother anymore." Nathan said he didn't even raise his voice. He just told her, "That's your decision," and walked out of the kitchen. He said it was the first time in his life that threat hadn't worked on him, and that the silence afterward had felt less like losing something and more like finally putting something down. Richard was the one who surprised me most. A week later, he called and asked to meet me for coffee, alone, which had never happened in 9 years. He looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I've known for years," he told me, turning his cup slowly on the table, "some of what your mother-in-law does." I told myself I was keeping the family together by staying quiet. I didn't realize I was teaching everyone else to stay quiet too. He said he wanted to fix what he could, starting with the trust. He'd already called his attorney. The meeting at the attorney's office a few weeks later was the moment everything finally came apart at the seams. Not loudly, but completely. Evelyn walked in, expecting, I think, for the conversation to turn toward me, the way it always had. Instead, the attorney laid out the actual terms of the trust Richard had created. The money split evenly between Nathan and Lauren, with a clause specifically preventing either sibling or anyone else from controlling the other's portion. Evelyn had never had any authority over that money. She had simply convinced Lauren she did. And then the attorney said something that changed the room entirely. Richard, it turned out, had spent years quietly documenting other financial gifts to the family, not because he distrusted his children, but because he wanted a record that no one could later claim had been manipulated by anyone else. He had been preparing, in his own careful way, for exactly this kind of conflict, long before Harper ever hung a paper snowflake on that tree. Evelyn tried one last time to pull the conversation back toward me, some version of the same story that I had always wanted to pull Nathan away from his family. And Nathan, for the first time in his life, interrupted his mother in front of everyone. "I chose my job," he said. "I chose our vacations. I chose Harper's daycare. I chose my marriage, and I let you blame Emily for every single one of those choices because it was easier than telling you no." The room was silent. Evelyn didn't have an answer. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I think it matters more than anything else in this story. I didn't ask Nathan to cut his mother off. I didn't ask for an apology in front of everyone, or for her to lose anything, or for some dramatic reckoning. I asked for 3 things: that she never put her hands on me or spoke to intimidate me again, that she never use money to control this family again, that she never undermined Nathan and me as Harper's parents again. "I'm not asking you to love me," I told her, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm asking you to respect me." That was all. No revenge, just a line, drawn clearly for the first time in 10 years. The months after that were not simple, and I think that's important to say too, because real families don't heal in one scene. Nathan had to prove his change through small moments, over and over. Correcting his mother mid-sentence at a family dinner, answering for his own choices instead of letting me carry them. I watched him do it for weeks before I let myself believe it was real. Lauren and I found our way back to something slowly, carefully, starting with an apology she gave me on my porch one evening in early spring. "I believed her because it was easier than questioning her," she said, and I understood that sentence better than she probably knew. Evelyn's apology, when it finally came, wasn't at a holiday or in front of an audience. It was months later, over coffee, just the 2 of us. She talked for a long time about stress, about the property sale, about feeling like her family was slipping away from her, and then finally she stopped explaining and just said, "I hurt you." She admitted she had grabbed my wrist. She admitted she had blamed me for choices that were never mine to make. I accepted the apology. I want to be clear that accepting it didn't mean erasing the boundaries. Forgiveness and unlimited access are not the same thing, and I had spent 10 years confusing them. The first time Evelyn saw Harper again was a short visit at our new home, a farmhouse Nathan and I had found outside the city, older and imperfect, and entirely ours. Evelyn brought a small craft kit, nothing extravagant, nothing performative. At one point, Harper looked up at her and asked, in the plain way 5-year-olds asked the questions adults spend years avoiding, whether Grandma was still mad at Mommy. Evelyn knelt down to her level. "No, sweetheart," she said. "Grandma was wrong." I don't think I will ever forget that sentence. A year later, we hosted Christmas ourselves, in our own home, on our own terms. There was still tension in the room. I won't pretend there wasn't. Nobody acted as though the past hadn't happened. But everyone in that room had changed in some small, real way. Harper hung her paper snowflake on our tree, and this time nobody touched it. Later that evening, she knocked over the cranberry sauce across the table, and for 1 second, the whole room froze, the old instinct of bracing for a reaction. And then Evelyn grabbed a towel and started laughing, and the tension just broke, like something exhaling. I laughed too. It was such a small moment, but it told me everything about how far we'd come. I think about that Christmas often now, the first one, the one with the wrist and the frozen room. For years, I believed being a good wife meant keeping everyone comfortable, even at my own expense. I believed maturity meant swallowing insults quietly. I believed peace meant avoiding hard conversations. I don't believe any of that anymore. Real peace was never built by making one person stay quiet so everyone else could stay comfortable. It's built when everyone is finally willing to tell the truth, take responsibility for their own choices, and respect the boundaries of the people around them. I never needed Evelyn's approval to belong in that family. I only needed to stop letting someone else write the story of what happened inside my own home. If this story moved you, if any part of it reminded you of your own family, of a boundary you've been afraid to set, or a silence you've let go on too long, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Family Revenge Tales. We tell these stories because so many of you have lived some version of them, and because every one of us deserves to be heard in our own family, not just tolerated in it. Wherever you are tonight, remember this. You don't have to destroy anyone to win back your own peace. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply become impossible to control. What makes the story valuable isn't the drama of the confrontation, it's what happens after it. It shows how manipulation inside a family often isn't loud or obvious, but quiet, patient, and built one small, distorted story at a time, which is exactly what makes it so hard to recognize while you're living inside it. It shows silence, even when it comes from love or fear rather than cruelty, can cause as much damage as an actual betrayal, because it allows someone else's version of events to become the accepted truth. And it shows that real resolution doesn't require revenge or public humiliation. It requires honesty, accountability, and boundaries that are enforced consistently over time. For anyone who has ever felt like the outsider in their own family, or the person everyone else quietly blames to avoid harder conversations, this story is a reminder that you are allowed to ask for respect, even from people who are supposed to love you, and that doing so isn't selfish. It's the beginning of real peace.